finally dumped it, I said, you never know what in the world you're going to see, but if you're going to take a picture, for heaven's sake, get down close to the water when you're taking the picture. That barge dumping, because that's where you see the action, not up above. You don't see it up above.
Yeah.
You see it right down eyeball to it. It's very intensive at that particular second. But we're getting back to Westminster.
Well,
it's a residential area to my. I guess I always will think of it as a residential city.
Yeah.
And it's now they're putting high rises down along the waterfront. They're going to lose that.
The last bit of that. I mean, there's not much left in Queensboro that's industrial as well. Like, of course, Mercer's, which was more recently Fraser Shipyard, closed down finally after 104 years on that site. Ed Mercer, clearing the land himself back in, I think, 1906 or something.
What are you going to do with that waterfront property there?
Well, that part, there is actually talk of having a truck barge transfer dock on the big sawmill site. So there is going to be some element of industrial, because, of course, this is something that Mike Owen mentioned to me. We were talking about, deindustrialization, and he pointed out Annacis Island as a good example that, that there's not enough access to it. It was a great place to, there was a lot of room to expand for industrial purposes, but the question of access.
Getting on and off, it's tough.
Yeah, and so I think that's part of what's driving the idea of having this barge slip in the North Arm on I can't remember the name of the mill site. It's right adjacent to the Queensboro Bridge, just down from Fraser Shipyards.
The main barge site they had on Annacis, whether it was on Lulu Island, as I call it, Richmond, was at number 6 Road, just above the Fraser Bridge there, and the old Fraser Bridge. And that was Richmond's gravel dock. And our company had a contract with Richmond to haul gravel from Port Kells. It was quarried right on the beach at Port Kells down there for their road building.
That's amazing. I didn't even know they had. Well, actually, I guess
It's
that's
taken
just
over now by the barging, the barging containers out of Gibson's up there, and putting them off, and the Paul River, what's his name in Paul River, trucking guy out there. He's got a bunch of tugs and barges, and he's hauling freight and one thing and another. And that's his main depot in there.
Well, they've got. Is that the guys that have the Inlet Roamer and Inlet Rover and
Yes,
whatnot?
I believe something
Yeah.
like that, yeah.
I saw the old Gulf Irene the other day. She's now, I think, C-SPAN. What did she become? The Gulf Irene, C-SPAN. Navigator. Oh no, maybe it wasn't. I'm looking at this other book of Sid's Tying the Knot. Here we go. We're recording now. So it's December 16th, 2012, and I'm Mark McKenzie. I'm here with Captain Ed Taylor. This is our second interview with him for the New Westminster Reclaiming Waterfront project. Captain Taylor's has a biography done on him by Sid Heal called The Loose Cannon, and it's a good reference for background information to cover over a lot of the things we're going to be talking about. I'm going to start with a list of questions we put together earlier about this. Ed, as a young person in Vancouver in the early 1930s, Did you hear much about the strikes that were going on in the New Westminster waterfront? How about the Vancouver waterfront?
Yes, on the Vancouver waterfront, my father was working at Ballantyne Pier, and the strike came on, and everyone was, of course, laid off, and then the operators started recruiting people to take their place. They were called scabs in those days. Unfortunately, what happened, and I can tell you this from experience, that my father never got back to work again. The scabs took over 100%, and the original longshoreman never got back. One of our neighbors was the crane operator at Ballantyne Pier for about 15 years. He got laid off and somebody else took his place. He never did work again. That's what happened as far as the strike in Vancouver waterfront was concerned.
That's horrible. What were the attitudes of just the general people towards the strikers, towards the strike, towards the employers? Like, where you were living, was it generally, I mean, in the newspapers you saw a lot of stuff about communists and whatnot, but how did just regular folks feel about it? What was going on?
Unless they were involved in personally, I don't think too much was said about it, because the work continued regardless of whether the strike was on. They had enough strike breakers to do all the work, so there was no slowdown on the waterfront.
How did people like feel that the management or the strikers were reasonable or unreasonable? Or
I don't think in those days that that was much of an argument.
Huh.
A job was a job in those days. There was no welfare. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. So the people that went to work in lieu of, say, my father,
yeah,
they had to eat too.
but that must have made things really tough for your family.
Well, that was, then he had to find another job, of course, which he did, being an ex-rancher. He got the job looking after all the horses for Crystal Dairy down on 3rd Avenue and Clark Drive.
Wow.
He was right in his glory then, looking after the horses again.
It's kind of funny.
It worked out
to the
very well for him, right until he finally had to retire because the Crystal Dairy sold out to Palm Dairy in Calgary. He retired at 77.
Wow. Did they retire the horses at the same time?
Yes.
Did they start?
Yes, because it all went into cars.
Okay. How did you come to work for Bill Hughes Husky Towboats?
A friend of mine, a year or two older than I, had that job, but he was leaving. He wanted to leave that job and go into some other type of operation, and so he told me there was a job going down the tug if I wanted, because I knew a little bit about diesel engines from technical school, and so I went down and got the job.
Because you went to Vancouver Tech,
yes,
just over on Broadway.
Yes.
Could you describe a typical day's work on that job you did for Husky Towboats? This is, what, 1934?
Husky Towboats in those days was a relatively small company. It was just Bill Hughes and myself. That's all there was in the company. He had two tugs tied up behind Terminal Dock by the foot of Nanaimo Road. One was the Reef Point, an ex-fishbacker, and the other was the Camrilco, formerly Campbell River Towing Company at White Rock. It was a log towing tug. And that's all Bill did, because he was really a boom man to start with. and he branched out into tugs. He never had a certificate, but he could operate a tug very well.
So when you guys, you'd take booms from move them about Vancouver Harbor, and you also took them around to Marpole and into the North Arm of the Fraser, didn't you?
Yes.
Could you describe that? We talked about this before, but for the benefit of this recording, could you describe?
Vancouver Harbor in North Vancouver, it was an area called Moodyville, where the Harbors Board had a log storage area to contain log booms that came down the coast and were brought in there and stored and then sold from there to different mills. And one of our jobs was to deliver little booms to the mills. The size of booms depended on the accommodation at the mills where they could store them for manufacturing. Our job was on call. We'd go maybe 2 or 3 days before we'd get a call to move a log boom from North Vancouver to one of the sawmills in Vancouver, or Falls Creek, or the North Arm.
With Moodyville, that was located roughly where Lynterm is now, wasn't it? That's how
Yes,
I understand.
yes, pretty well.
Kind of at the mouth of the Lynn River. So it was below the Second Narrows. When you initially worked for Bill Hughes Husky Towboats, towing scows and logs, what were your wages?
$2. Really, on a call out, I'd get a $2 bill. And it didn't really matter whether it was 4 hours or 14 hours. It was a $2 bill.
But for a guy of 16 or 15, that wouldn't have been all that bad, eh?
And he lived about 4 or 5 blocks away from us, and he'd take a bag of sandwiches down to the boat. That's all we had, and I'd make coffee. I could make coffee on the boat, but we didn't have any food, just the sandwiches, because it was just a day job.
Uh-huh. So you had a little galley stove?
Oh yes, yeah. There was, in addition to that, was in the barging end of that. Pretty well the only barging we did with Husky towboats was towing oil barges.
Oil barges?
So what they used to do in those days, really all companies, it was a reciprocative idea at best. Maybe when the oil bill got a little bit high, then the operator would phone the oil company, "Have you got a barge to move?" And that was about it. So we were moving Imperial oil barges around.
And kind of to
tit for tat.
Getting paid in fuel, kind of. Now, was this for bunkering, or was this for...
No, this is diesel oil. And
okay, for
gasoline.
like household stoves and that, or for...
Well, it was around the waterfront.
For gas stocks.
Back in those days, in that Husky days, when we went to fuel up down the fuel barges at Cold Harbor, diesel oil was 5 cents a gallon.
Wow.
And gasoline was 2 bits a gallon for the oil barge.
Even then, that was
even
then that was cheap, wasn't it?
How cheap it was, because when the crews are away for a long time, they're not home. The idea of washing clothes becomes a problem. And of course, when you work in the engine room, you're always covered in carbon.
Yeah.
And what we used to do, get the old bucket out on the back deck with a couple of gallons of gasoline in it, and in goes your blue jeans and
to get the oil and grease off.
Wash it all out, and then tie them onto a tagline and put them over the stern and drag them behind for a couple of days. They come back nice and clean.
That's great.
They throw the gas overboard with the dirty
Because I guess you couldn't use it
stuff
for
on
anything.
them. That was normal.
Yeah.
These days. It's just normal.
And $2 a call out.
$2 a call. It was just normal. And when you think of it, that was back in those days, $65 a month for 24-hour day work was normal.
Hmm.
And of course, you got bed and board at the same time. Besides that, besides the $2 a day.
That was sort of a deckhand's job
Yeah,
in those for a regular deckie. So how far up the north arm of the Fraser could you bring a tow on a single tide? Like you mentioned before, you would use the outgoing tide to get you around Point Grey, and then
Well, if you had a good big tide from Sandheads, you'd buck standing in the north arm. You'd buck tide until it kept up with you, and then you just keep going with the tide, and you can go up as far as White Pine, I guess, foot of Kerr Road.
okay, foot of Kerr Road,
Um,
the White Pine Mill. And now you mentioned this before. Did you ever get jobs where you had to proceed further up? So would you tie up, say at around White Pine, and then go up, on the next tide, or
no,
did you
that's
generally?
about as far as we went with logs.
Okay. So you left Bill Hughes Husky, and you got work with Captain Granholm.
Yes.
Why did you originally leave? You just
Because Granholm got more work.
Oh,
I used
okay.
to see this red painted tugboat all the time
okay.
in the harbor where we were tied up, not doing anything. And so I went down and I got a job from him.
How did Bill feel about losing his deckhand?
He didn't like it, of course, because once he's more or less trained you, he's got to train somebody else to do what you were doing. And with a one-man operation, it's time-consuming and a little nervous because he can never get away from the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to be trained. Somebody that has some knowledge of mechanics. You can't go aboard there if you don't know anything about engines.
Yeah. You're useless to him if you couldn't function as
You got to
engineer.
go down and lube up all the time. Every half hour you got to down and fill up the lubricator.
Right, for the stuffing box and or adjusting this. Were you doing things like adjusting the
Well,
stuffing
the
box, or was that
stuffing
his
box,
job?
Before you leave, you have
Yeah.
to open it a
Loosen
bit
up.
so
Yeah.
you can go. But the lubricators are just more or less manual.
On the shaft
But
bearings,
Every half hour you have to go down and fill up the
little oil cups.
lubricator
Yeah.
with lube oil.
Yeah. This is on a Buddha diesel. You
Well, it
mentioned
could
that.
be
What is it?
any type of
Yeah.
diesel.
After the Tussler shipwreck, we spoke earlier that we got a lot of that story, and it's well recorded in Heal's book, where you were left on board the Tussler and she blew up. That must have been,
Well, you don't know what's going to happen.
yeah. What were your thoughts at that time? Like to see the barge drifting off,
I thought,
and you were
holy
sitting.
smoke! I can't catch up to that. I can't swim that fast. The wind was taking it away out of sight, and I didn't know exactly where I was going to go. But if I hadn't blown up, I would have been able to swim around and get on the little island
That you'd run
thing was
into.
aground. But I didn't even have a chance. I got blown into the water.
Wow.
Kind of a foot or two swell there rolling you, and 10 o'clock at night you really don't know where you're going. You go with it.
When you got back to Vancouver, I guess you brought the story of what happened with you. There probably was no like advanced communication that you'd been in a shipwreck, or
Oh no! Well, I wrote a letter to my girlfriend so she could tell my mom that I was all right. Instead of writing to my mom.
How did your mom feel when you got home? Like, did she give you a bit of a talking to about this Marine career you were looking
Are
at?
you sure you're in the right,
She said that.
right spot?
Yeah, I guess being a bass player or
But
a
yeah,
musician was a little bit less dangerous.
I had to get going on something right away quick. So.
That's what I was going to ask you. How long did it take you to find work after the
Probably
grant
not
home?
very long, because if you didn't work, you didn't eat.
Mhm.
Thing.
And were you were still living at home when you were off the boat, or were you?
When I was
And
off
so,
the boat, yeah.
so you're contributing to rent and,
Yes.
and that and food
Yes.
at home. You next went to work for Vancouver Towing, wasn't it, on the
Yeah,
Kingsway?
Vancouver Tugboat Company. They
Yeah.
were situated on Cordova Street at the foot of Homer, at the north foot of Homer.
Did
And what I
Ken-
didn't know at that time, that the man that gave me the job was the owner, Harold A. Jones.
Huh. So tell me a little bit about that. You just walked in there
I
one
walked
day,
in and asked for a job.
and you happened to
Well,
see
he
this
said,
gentleman.
Where have you been? What have you been doing? So I told him. Oh, was that it? Okay, well, yeah. Okay, I'll put your name down. So a day or two later, I got a phone call to be ready at 10 o'clock the next morning. Somebody's going to pick me up and take me out to a boat. And to get my kit bag ready, because of an outside boat, so I put whatever I thought I needed in the kit bag, and the manager came. And, first of all, he sat down and had a cup of coffee with my dad. And he started chewing the fat, and then he looked at his watch and, oh, by God, we better get going. He said, the tug's sitting out off Steveson waiting for you. And so he bundled me and my stuff into his car and drove me to Steveson. And there was a little gillnet boat there. He put me on a gillnet boat, and the gillnet boat took me out alongside the Kingsway, that was just stemming the tide with some barges behind it.
This would have been 35, about.
In about there, yeah.
Yeah. What was a typical journey on the Kingsway, and what tasks?
Well, this was during the freshet in the river, and what they were doing, had flat barges, 3 flat barges, and they were towing them across to Ladysmith. And Comox Logging had a log dump in there, and they were loading them on these flat barges, and then we were taking them up the main river to Cyril Elevator, which is where Surrey is now.
Was that the grain elevator they built
Yes.
there?
And we shortened them up from deep sea gear into short coupling for going through the Westminster Bridge.
And then take them to Fraser Mills?
Yeah, just up through the bridge with them and over to Fraser Mills. We picked up 3 empties on deep sea gear.
And take them back then?
And went up around the sandbar, the dividing island off Fraser Mills.
Oh yeah, Citibank, or
Went
it's
up
now
around
called.
there with the deep sea gear, and then headed for a draw on the Westminster Railway Bridge.
They call it
Around-
Sapperton Island now.
Around the railway bridge with deep sea gear.
That must have been kind of
Well,
tense.
you think about that, but in that day, I thought, well, this is the way they do it. This is the way I didn't know any different.
So how much line did they have out?
Well, they had it short to
Right.
the first barge, but then you got deep sea
Still
wire
a
to the
long
next
coupling
barge
to
and
the next one.
another pennant to the next barge. So they had them all in about, maybe 100 feet apart, something like that.
So that's got to take a good deal of skill to line everything up, wouldn't it?
Yes, I wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't have wanted to do it even today.
But that was just standard. Did they
He
do
did
that?
it and just,
Who was your skipper on the Kingsway? Do you remember?
I think it's in the book here.
Okay.
I can't remember right now.
Okay. Did you want to take a break or
No, no.
The other question I wanted to ask you was, what are your memories of the Sandheads lightship? Because
That was always out there,
Yeah.
bouncing around.
yeah, the old
It was anchored out
yeah.
there, rolling around. That's before they drove the dolphins.
Yeah. And had they built much of the jetty at that point, like the rock wall out to the Sandheads?
Not as far as they should have.
So you had a lot of infilling,
There
or a
was
lot?
quite an area there that there was no rocks. You kind of think back, well, because time changed over the years and they put more rocks down and they really rebuilt redredged the main channel
Mhm.
for the deep sea shipping also.
The approach must have been pretty challenging to the Sandheads in some weather, was it?
Well, there was very little illumination, and the river pilots, they did all the work. They were used to it,
Okay.
so there was really no problem with deep sea shipping. They were in there several times a week, so
Did they have a pilot boat based out of Steveston?
oh no, Westminster.
Oh, so the pilot boat would leave from New West, go all the way down to meet the deep seas
Well-
off the Sandheads?
No, pardon me, there's a pilot boat at Stevenson. There was a pilot boat at Stevenson, and they went down there by taxi.
Okay.
And
I know that some of the...
what would happen is that you, on the pilot boat would be the coast pilot would be on there too, and you would be with you. If I was a pilot, a river pilot, I'd go aboard with a coast pilot and take the boat out or bring or else if I was in the reverse position, I'd go out and put the river pilot on board the ship and take the coast pilot on board, bring him back, and he could take a taxi to Vancouver. So you were just feeding them back and forth.
Okay. I know
As far
that...
as Westminster is concerned, of course, well, the pilot would go all the way back up
Yeah.
to Westminster.
I know that
It'd just be a river pilot, though.
James Rogers and R.C. Menton, they were two Samson captains from the Samson 3 and the Samson 4. And you see in the logbooks that they often take a half day off to pilot vessels. And
Yeah, they had a haphazard situation there in Westminster where the Harbours Board, they hired 7 pilots on commission. These are all on commission. This was really the tough part of it. And these boys here they're working for the federal government. And so if they had to take a couple of hours off or a day off or something to run a ship down to the lightship, that was extra dollars, sure, that was fine with them.
right. But so that's what you mean by when one eats crackers, all eat crackers. Like you mentioned, when you were after the war, you were
Well,
kind
this-
of
this- like
considering-
the fellow that was manager of, I forget what his name is now, of Pacific Coast Terminals. He was an ex-pilot, and he was really what he said to me was the final thing. He said when they offered me a job there, and for the first 3 months, I'd get $400 a month. They'd pay me regardless of the number of ships I took in and out. And after that, I was on my own with the rest of them. And at that particular time, they were getting $300 a month is all they were making. The pilots were. They must have been living at home with their mothers and dads. Because I was getting about 5 times that amount in Gulf of Georgia.
Wow.
But I guess Bill Kopachinski, he must have been living at home because he left Gilly Brothers Tug Sword.
Mm-hmm.
He went on there and took my place. And he changed his name to White, Billy White. And then the rudest part is the Vancouver Pilots took over, and they got a base rate of $80,000 a year.
That's just stunning money in those days. I've never seen anything close to that money in my
Well,
life.
these guys here, the Harbor Coastal Pilots, that was the minimum.
Wow.
Oh yes.
That's getting back to Fraser Mills, where did you leave the barges that were destined for Fraser Mills when you were running? The reason of getting back to when you were working on the Kingsway.
You know, we tied up the loads there and picked up empties that were already there and took them back to Ladysmith.
Okay. Now, did you also work upriver, bringing logs down from the pit or elsewhere, or
Oh no,
not with those guys?
when I was working with Harbor Towing, Bill Dolmage had money in the fast water tugs up at Cope and Harrison. And I got sent up there from the coast and I'd be on the Iron Bark or PRT, and they'd be in the shipyard for a wheel change or something. He'd send me up there for a couple of days to work on one of the fast water boats.
How did you find that work? Was it pretty challenging?
It was, of course, I was full of beans in those days, and they're all young guys working there. It's only summertime work.
Right.
There's not enough sand, not enough water to run the rest of the year. But they worked on farms and one thing and another up that area.
Would you say there are
No,
fellows
on
with...
farms, but he'd bring a log boom down to the Harrison, and you get part of the way down river, and when it's starting getting dark, well, the skipper would want to pull in and tie up, and so he put you back on the log boom, and you go back near the tail end of the boom with this. Well, you'd already have this, but a 3/4 inch wire, a couple to the tail end of the boom, and you get the logs in running down the beach. You jump off with this wire and run down here and take a couple turns around a tree. To slow her down, you know. If that didn't slow down, you took off down to the next tree, and because they don't run at night up there.
I guess you'd be
They don't
just
work at night.
crazy, yeah, to try doing that.
But I thought that was fun. Of course,
That's pretty exciting. Oh.
that'd be called fast water boats.
What were they? Tunnel sterned or
Tunnel stern.
Yeah,
You know.
and gas engined or
No diesels.
they were diesels.
You know.
They were all still wood hulls in those days.
Oh.
Yeah,
All wood hulls, yeah.
that's a. What we're doing there, good. Later on, after the Kingsway, you went working for the CPR.
Yes.
How did you wind up getting aboard with them?
Well, my father knew a fellow at church. His name was Mr. Lemon, and he worked in the ticket office at Pure BC. And Dad asked him if there was any chance of an opening there, and he says, "Oh yeah," he says, "come down and see Carl Timms." So I went down and saw this Mr. Carl Timms, and he said, yeah, can you come down tonight? I want you to go on one of the boats.
That was pretty quick. And you started right away
Yeah, the
doing
Princess Charlotte.
Princess Charlotte. And then
That left for a summer cruise to Skagway. Nothing but the best.
then later on they put you on barges after the or tugs on the tug service after.
Well, what happened there? Every 6 weeks you got a week off with pay. And when you got back, went back to work, I'd phone Mr. Timms. Where do I go, Mr. Timms? Oh, the Adelaide's in. You go in the Adelaide at noon tomorrow. And so I'd go in there. I might go in there for a week, and the guy that was off on days off would be back, and so I was off, and you go on something else, and then eventually I was sent down to Victoria, and then I was Victoria was the head office of CP ships. You'd think Vancouver was, but Vancouver had the largest contingent of ships because it was a kind of the starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Victoria was way out 70 miles from
Yeah.
Vancouver. So I went down there, and they put me on the McQuina on the west coast. I think they had an idea of putting new entries on the toughest run there was to see if they got seasick or what happened.
Sure.
But I managed to survive on there, and then they had a freighter in the summertime. In the fall, the Nootka, is 500-ton capacity freighter. I'm picking up fish meal, fish oil, and cases of pilchards and herring and salmon, and bringing them into Vancouver to Evans Coleman Dock.
Did the CP ever work up into the Fraser, up to New Westminster, or were they exclusively out of
Well,
Vancouver?
from what I can understand, they worked from Sydney to Steveston. They had a ferry run across there. I think the Saipec was it was Island something or other they called her. I was on board her once. Engineer from the Cayuga took me out there to have a look at it.
So it was mostly a CN that operated in the river then
The CN
for rail barge traffic.
tracks were in Surrey,
Yeah.
above the bridge, and they had a double-ender Kenora, steam boat Kenora. And they had the CN 107 and CN 109 barges, 16 railcar barges, and they had two tugs, CN 1 and CN 2. Gulf of Georgia got the CN 1 and called it the Gulf Frida.
Yeah. And they ran her very late. I mean, really, for a vessel that was First World War vintage, wasn't she? They ran her right up into the 60s, didn't they?
Well, we ran her. It was running when I left.
So
It
she
was
was
still
still
operating.
being used.
Yeah.
Right into the 70s.
Well, I got a job with her with Griffiths for Griffiths Steamships operation out of Prince Rupert, going up to Whittier, Alaska, hauling Griffiths Steamship Railway car barge, CN cars out of Prince Rupert. And she was on that for a long time, running across the Gulf of Alaska.
I guess, I mean, in retrospect, it's kind of similar to the idea of the sea commander, former Gulf Joan, still working now. I mean, the same kind of lifespan.
Of course, the Joan is much younger ship than that one was built about.
She was what, 1919? Yeah.
Something like that.
But now, of
Cayuga,
course,
sister ship of the Cayuga.
yeah.
I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw them wrecking the Cayuga. She was in beautiful shape.
When did they dismantle her?
must have been in the 47, 48.
She would still be in the prime of her life in those days.
She was in good shape, as far as I was concerned. The CPR kept her in fantastic condition.
Now, going back to when you were working for Bill Domage's Harbor Towing, did that
Yes.
involve a lot of time on the Fraser?
Only delivering. And when he sent me up to the fast water boats.
Okay. Just yeah, that was with Harbor Towing, and by delivering.
We deliver logs, like from up coast, from St. Knight's Inlet. We deliver logs into the Fraser up to Canadian White Pine or up in those areas.
How did sort of the pre-war New Westminster scow and tow work compared with post-war work in terms of wages and conditions? Was that 6-year interval where
During the war?
Yeah,
I wish I knew, because I wasn't out there only when I was out in the Navy
Yeah.
to fix up the fish boats. They must have had to pay comparative wages, because the fella that was mate with me at Gulf of Georgia on the Black Bear, he worked for Art Mercer during the war in his shipyard. And from what I can gather from what he said, that he worked for Westminster Towing also, and he left Westminster Towing to go to Mercer's.
Okay. So that was under
Probably Mercer
Art
paid
Cooper.
more money. That's my
Uh-huh.
opinion, because the Cooper family, they were not known to pay good wages.
With Annacis Island, getting back to that part too, like it was sort of a boneyard there for a long time behind the wall. Was that also where they stowed scows, like before the Japanese fishing boat fleet was interned there?
I know when I started with the Gulf of Georgia, they sure did.
Okay.
That was 47.
I'm trying to.
Outside the training wall, that was our scow ground.
Okay, because there's references in old logbooks of the Sampsons to pumping out scows in the boneyard and pulling up the pay streak out of Captain Holland's, or not Holland's, the pay streak out of the boneyard when they're building the Samson 3 and putting her in service briefly, towing a scow alongside to do snag clearance while they're getting the Samson 3 ready in 1914. And so there's this boneyard. I'm trying to locate it. So that was probably the spot.
And that got filled in by the dredge King Edward. Like after the Navy finished with it. It was obvious, because I went to work for Gulf of Georgia in 47, and that behind, I know, because I remember acutely where the area was, because I'd worked there for the Navy, and it was all full of sand, pump sand from St. Mungo's up. And
with the pipe arrangements.
so everything was covered. All the sunken gillnet boats jet boats were all covered with sand by that time.
Yeah, there must be tons of them down there. Nowadays, so the interned fishing boat fleet, I mean, we've got pictures of that.
There was a picture in the Sun paper the other day of a congregation of these thousands of these boats at Steveston.
Yeah.
It was tremendous, all these gillnet boats, Jack Gillnet's boats, and this huge, great big flotilla. I guess just above Steveston.
Yeah, I got a picture of it. I think it was in here.
I will say that the Japanese boats were fastidious in housekeeping on them.
There's some of the Mercer boys back in, that's about 1912. And here's a shot of Fraser Mills in the early days loading. We're looking at the Fraser River elevator picture. This is in the Fraser Port book.
They were all serial elevator.
Yeah. And there's a longshoreman. This is in about 1929. Whenever I see pictures like this, it just astounds me. You know, going under the Patello Bridge and through the swing bridge, and we've got a close to 500-foot long cargo liner, cargo passenger liner. And it's just astounding to think, getting that through there. Here's the Samson 5, circa 1939-40, off of taken off of Surrey. When you worked with the Department of Public Works, what were the hiring practices for the crews? Like how did you get your job, and how did guys like deckhands get hired for the Department of Public Works?
As far as I was concerned, Bernard Niles, a friend of mine from the tugboat industry in Marpole, phoned me that there was a job going at New Westminster in the Department of Public Works, and to go out and see a Mr. I can't remember his name. He had a shoe store on the south side of Columbia Street, not far away from Fraser Cafe.
Not Cops, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He had something to do with the Westminster Board of Trade.
Okay.
I went in, got interviewed with him, and he said, "Fine, you've got the job." And he said, "Would you go down and examiner of masters and mates and get a minor water passenger master's ticket? It'll cost you $5." So I got on Interurban and went downtown and saw my old friend George Barber, the examiner, and I asked him. He laughed. "Oh, this will be easy." He hauled it out of his drawer and signed it, and he says, "$5, please." And then I said, "Why do I have to have this?" He says, "Because," he said, "the boat you're going on carries passengers, 28 or 30 passengers back and forth between the dredge and shore, and you've got to take them out to work in the morning and bring them home back at night." I said, "Oh, that's all it is." He didn't say you had to have 28 life jackets or anything.
That was the Point Pelly.
Yeah. Oh dear. That was funny. That was really funny.
Can you describe the Point Pelly? Like,
I'm trying to think. She was probably around the 40s, and as far as length was concerned, and maybe 12 in beam. She was 72 Gardner, direct reverse. Beautiful engine room control, not wheelhouse control.
so you had to have a man down there.
Oh yes, you had one in the wheelhouse on the engine.
Engine room telegraphs.
The telegraph, and you had to ring the telegraph and run out on deck and put a line on and rush back in and ring the telegraph. And
So you had no deckhand, just an engineer.
no, and they'd been going on that since the first of the century,
Yeah.
with no deckhand on there. and all these maybe 20 odd deckhands on the King Edward, and nothing on the Point Pelly at all. You had to do your own.
I was interviewing another fellow, Captain Albert Gibson, and he started out on the King Edward as a deckhand in about 48, just after you left, just after Hollis Young retired. And he was saying that a lot of the fellows, the deckies on the King Edward, were hired. They're ex-military. They're just out of the army, and a lot of them were pretty badly shell shocked. Some of them the guys, like the senior crew, were all long-term seamen, but the junior guys, the deckhands, a lot of them were.
Well, what happened was that Bob Blackstock belonged to the Army and Navy vets in New Westminster.
And he was the mate, wasn't he?
He was the mate on the King Edward, the unlicensed mate, King Edward. And one of the first times he saw me, he came into the wheelhouse and he said, do you belong to the Legion? And I said, no, I'm not. I don't drink beer. I'm not a beer drinker, so there's no point in going in the Legion. And he says, well, most of the crew belong to the Army and Navy Veterans of Canada, and I'd like to sign you up. Most of them on the boat here belong to the Army and Navy Veterans of Canada. And he says, well, I don't know how much he asked me for, $5 or $6 or something for membership in the Army and Navy. And that's the last I heard of the Army and Navy vets. I never got a card. I never got anything.
So they didn't really have a
So
clubhouse?
what happened? He probably hired the guys that came into the hull.
That makes a certain amount of sense. So could you describe a typical shift or day's work with the Department of Public Works on the Point Pelly?
Well, first thing in the morning, and I can't remember what time, we'd all arrive down at Pacific Coast Terminals dock, and I'd go down aboard the boat, and my engineer would be down there and open up the engine room and get things going. And I'd go aboard, and the skipper of the King Edward would come and he'd say, okay, Ed, he says, I guess all my gang are here, we can go. And so we'd take off alongside the King Edward, tie up, shut down the engine, and everybody go aboard the dredge. And the engineers in the dredge would start up the boilers and start going on there, and then everybody would head to the dining rooms. There was different dining rooms. There was a dining room for the officers and one for the crew. And so we'd have the chief engineer and second engineer, and myself and my engineer, and the captain and the mate, and of course the Chinese cook.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'd be in our, and we'd be in there till about 9 o'clock, and then he'd say, okay, let's go to work. And we'd get back in the tug, and then Paul Blackstock would tell me where he wanted me to go, which corner anchor he wanted to put out.
So you'd be deploying the anchors for him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they had a little tug called the Knockabout.
Mm-hmm.
And it became the Black Bass. When Gulf of Georgia bought it at the end. It became the Black Bass. When Gulf of Georgia bought the dredge, it became our Black Bass. Well, he'd be bull cooking on one wing, and I'd be bull cooking on the other. The corner, he had about 40 or 50 horsepower, a little diesel, and he's all by himself in this little 30-foot tug.
Wow.
With a trunk cabin forward, you know, wheelhouse aft. That's it. You know, tow bit. So he'd be all by himself on that, on the Knockabout all the time, and so I'd look after generally the port. I looked after all the port pipeline. And
So you're moving the pipeline
Pipeline
pontoons
and-
around
and
too
the
as
anchor line.
well. As deckhand and captain, and you got
Yeah.
your engineers in the
Yeah,
down below.
like get the corner anchor. Sometimes he wanted me on the tow line on it, and sometimes he wanted me to push behind the corner anchor to keep it tight on onto the anchor so that he can swing. They use that to
And
swing back and forth.
And the King Edward also had spuds too, didn't it? Great big huge
Yes, it had
spuds
the
that
spuds.
hoist
It
up and
had
down.
the stern spud and the bow spud. It could walk.
Huh.
It could walk itself without even using the paddle. If the tide was running too fast, he'd use the paddle to move ahead. For the next cut, you'd have to go ahead 15 or 20 feet for the next cut.
The King Edward must have had some amazing machinery. I think she's got 2
Oh.
boilers at least.
She's beautiful.
Yeah, they kept her well, didn't they?
Wooden hull, yeah. Only the federal government would have the money to keep up a vessel like that. You must remember that it was under tremendous strain all the time, between the spuds and the anchors and also the suction. It was under the whole vessel was under tremendous strain all the time. It must have taken a lot of life out of that
Yeah.
whole rig. But
They worked
Georgia
it
got
for-
it. But surprising enough, after Jimmy Byrne bought it, they took the steam boilers out and put diesel in, dieselized the whole machine, and it ended up going up and dredging Kitimat.
Wow. It's amazing. For a vessel that was built, I think 1906, something like that.
Yeah. That was a story in itself too.
And you were back up the Harrison River with the King Edward.
Yes.
And
That was a surprise to me. I'd been up there with the fast water boats,
Yeah.
and they decided they were going to dredge out the river above the traffic bridge.
Huh.
And boulders that big going through that pipeline.
That must have wore out some
Oh.
machinery, hey?
Must have wore those lines out, and it wore our eardrums out too, all day long, hearing those rocks going out through that
It
pipeline.
must have been just incredible.
D6 cat at the end pushing the rocks out of the way. Busy, yeah.
Wow.
But there weren't too many. Well, a couple of farms fairly close to the river there, but that's about all there was then.
What was the Point Pelly's job on that task? Because you're not ferrying crew much, are you? When
Only
you were
taking them out and taking them back in.
Oh, but while
that's
you're up,
that's the only time we ferried the crew.
yeah. So when you're up the Harrison River, everybody's staying on
We
board
stayed on board, yes.
of the King Edward.
We slept on the Pelly. The Pelly had
Okay.
sleeping accommodation, so there's room for 3 of us.
I think I
I
remember.
complained to Mr. Fraser, the chief engineer of Public Works, that all these deckhands on the King Edward sitting around smoking, and here I was racing around, running the telegraph and everything, and doing the deckhand work myself on the barge, on the tug. And I said, "This is not fair, for one thing." And I said, "It's not safe for another. If I were to slip and fall over the side, there's nobody. The engineer doesn't know. He's down on the port side aft, down in his engine room. He doesn't know where I am. I
Yeah.
could be falling overboard, and the tug would be doing
We'll be
whatever."
going. Yeah. Just
And so he said, "Okay, get yourself a deckhand." I said, "Fine, I'll get my brother-in-law." So I did.
oh, good. And I think you mentioned the mosquitoes up the Chehalis River.
Yes, at nighttime. Oh boy, the wind went down in Harrison Bay, and as soon as the wind went down, the mosquitoes came out. Wow, they were hungry.
How was the time off, wages, and other working conditions with the Department of Public Works compared with the private sector at that time?
I never had a holiday from them.
You just constantly worked for DPW?
Yeah. I never had a holiday from them.
That must have
I
been.
never quit because of no holidays.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. You want me to put
Thank
your
you.
sandwich away, Ed?
Yes, please, for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Were the wages decent as a tug captain for the Department of Public Works compared to the private sector?
They're substandard. They were St. Lawrence wages, which are about 20% below
West Coast?
West Coast wages. Yeah.
That's really
Department
interesting.
of Public Works.
What's the attraction for working for the DPW then in those days?
I guess, see, back in the Depression, there's two words: steady job.
Mm.
That was your lifeblood. Steady job. No matter what it was, if it was a steady job, you could rely on it. You're going to get paid next week, and the week after, and the week after. I think that was the. And it was day work only.
Which would have been nice.
You could live home.
Yeah.
It's like,
And you had a young family at that time, right?
yeah, I
You're-
had a
you're-
little girl. Yeah.
yeah. So that would have been a big attraction, I
Mhm.
guess.
And my first month out of the Navy, they gave us a month holiday with pay before we got our discharge. And I went to work for Union Towing, skipper on the Victory 12, towing logs down from Knight Inlet to Calcutt Bay in Gambier Island.
Sorry, what was the
And
name of the boat?
I was away from home for the whole month, and here I had a little
Yeah,
year and a half old girl at home.
yeah.
In this house, as a matter of fact. So I decided when I get back down, I wasn't going to do that anymore. I wasn't going to go live away as I did before the war. I wasn't going to do that anymore. So I decided to look for a home job, and right out of the blue, Bernard Niles phoned.
So then after you mentioned before when you left the Department of Public Works pretty much right away, you were picked up with Gulf of Georgia Towing.
No, Mackenzie Barge and
Oh,
Derrick.
that was right. You had the Mackenzie Barge and Derrick
Ross
job.
Mackenzie was out on the dock there, and he looked down the tug and he says, "What are you doing down there?" I said, "I'm running this, Ross." He said, "Why don't you come to work for a good company?" And I said, "Oh, you got a job there?" And he said, "Yeah, I got a job there. Why don't you come to work for a good company?" I said, "When do I start?" He said, "Tomorrow." I said, "Okay." So I go up the phone, and I phoned up the office and Mr. Fraser, and I said, "Find yourself another skipper for tomorrow."
Wow.
That was it.
Sounds like you're a bit fed up with the Department of Public Works by that point, eh?
Well, I knew what the average wage was in all, like Westminster Tug and the rest of the tugs around there.
Mhm.
And just peanuts they're paying.
In the Fraser River, yeah. So you needed to get off the river because
So I went to work the next day. And it was only about half a mile away, I guess, from my parents' place, too. I grew up down in that area.
Mhm.
Foot of Victoria Drive, the harbor.
Mhm. Working for Mackenzie, how long did you work for them?
Well,
It's about-
it's the dredging like Fraser River Pile.
yeah.
Only it was much larger than Fraser River Pile in those days. Fraser River Pile was just in its infancy when Mackenzie Barge had been going for years and years.
Hmm. But the working conditions there
They had
didn't.
their own fleet of tugs.
Yeah.
It was a long time before Fraser Powell got tugs. I did a lot of work for Fraser Powell in my sales day.
Oh yeah.
They used to fly me up the coast to different areas, like Kitimat,
Uh-huh. That must have been fun.
Port Simpson, Stewart, all these different places. They were expanding their pile driving, float building work.
Okay.
Awfully nice bunch of people working there.
For Fraser Pile and Dredge.
Fraser Pile. Yeah.
Now with Mackenzie, you had some good friends there, but you didn't stay.
Well, Ross's brother was in charge of the tugs. Ross was in charge of the derricks. And his brother, the other brother, was in charge of Roach Point, the shipyard. Mackenzie shipyard over at Roach Point.
And they weren't giving you any...
Ross's theory was somewhat different than the tugboat industry, although we had 4 tugs. His thought was, you married a tug to a derrick, or a couple of derricks. You had 1 crew on the tug. That's all. Nobody else. No relief, ever.
So whenever the derrick works, the tug...
Work on something. You were always working. Always. They were always busy.
So that's a
So
steady...
I'd worked a whole year without a day off, and my daughter was about 2 or 3 years old by then, 2 years older by that time. So I asked him for one spring for a week or 2 off. I had some work to do at home. And, he said, "We don't give days off around here." I said, "No." I joined the Merchant Service Guild. And so I phoned up the guild manager. I told him what had happened. And he said, "Can you get a photostat of your log and bring it down?" Which I did. I never heard anything more for a couple of months. And then one day I looked up from where I was tied up down the end of the float. I saw the manager going into see Ken Mackenzie in the office.
This was the guy from the Merchant Service Guild?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was in there for quite a while, and then he came down the float. He had his briefcase with him, came down the float and came aboard, and he says, looked at his watch, and he said, it's 2 o'clock. Do you think you can be down to Union Steamship at 6 o'clock to go out on the Cardina? I said, "Doing what?" He said, "Mate on the Cardina." I said, "No. I'm not going to go mate on the Cardina." I said, "Don't I get any time off here?" He says, "Obviously not." I said, "Okay." So I got my jacket and I told the deckhand that I was leaving. He could do what he wanted. I wasn't coming back. And so I went up and I opened the office door, and Margaret, his sister, was at the desk, and I said, "I'm sorry, Margaret, but I won't be back." She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And we were neighbors, for heaven's sake.
So
I never did get any time off, and so I think I took some. Oh yes, I know. I think I took some time off. We were living with my father-in-law up on Holdham Avenue, because my mother-in-law had a stroke.
Oh,
So
dear.
my wife we moved in, sold our house, and moved in to their place, so my wife could look after her mom. This is before the days of old age pension, my friend. There was no old age pension in those days either. At 47, the old age pension came into effect.
Mhm.
When I got off the Tunerville trolley, which is a little double ender that ran between Boundary Road and Capitol Hill. I looked across the street and I saw Capitol Hill Plumbing and Electric, and I thought to myself, what if I can get a couple hours a week working in there? Why not? So I walked across the street and walked in, and the owner was there, and I said, do you need anyone want to do wiring? I learned knob and tube at technical school, and I learned plumbing at technical school too. I can be of some help around here. How about a job? And he says, when can you go to work? I said, now. Okay. Where do you live? I said, about 3 blocks down the hill. Oh, that's even better. Yeah. His name was Rourke, Cecil Rourke, an Irishman. So I went to work for him until I got a little fed up with his type of operation. He was doing things too much the cheap side. And I didn't want to have to meet his customers eye to eye on the street after having some of this cheap plumbing pulled on them. So I said to him, I think I'll go back to work on the boats. He says, oh, fine. Well, it was nice having you here. That's great. But he paid good wages. And so I went to the Towboat Owners Association, and I forget what the fellow's name was in there. I said, I'm looking for a job, but I don't want a job away from home. I want a harbor job or something close where I can get home. He said, I know where you can get a job. He said, I used to work there, Gulf of Georgia Towing. I said, oh, not Gulf of Georgia, that's a sweatshop. I've heard some bad news about working for them. He said, no. He says, it's a good place to work. He said, I worked there for a couple of years. He says, it's really a good place before I got this job here. So I said, okay. But in the meantime, I got a letter from Captain Jim Hamilton from the CPR offering me a mate's job on the Princess Joan for $185 a day. And I had this letter in my pocket.
A day? Or no, a month? Or
a month.
Yeah.
A month, I should say. Including uniform.
Oh.
Which I found out later you had to pay.
So they issue you a uniform and then deduct it?
So I had this in my pocket, and he drove down past Pier A.B., seeing up Burrard Street and over to Falls Creek to Gulf of Georgia. Dumped me off there. So I went in and got interviewed by Staff Byrne. And while I was being interviewed, he excused himself to go to the cam. He seemed to be away a long time. I was sitting in his office waiting for him to come out, and pretty soon he came out and he says, yeah, okay, when can you start work? And I says, anytime. He said, how about tomorrow? Be down here at 7 o'clock tomorrow. He said, further than that. He said, be out to New Westminster to the Shell Oil dock at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. And he said, you'll be on the Cupright. It was a tug that he had chartered for a couple of months in the freshet.
Getting back to when you'd heard that Gulf of Georgia, as you said, was a bit of a sweatshop, but it sounds like just about all these jobs were almost sweatshop conditions. I mean, no
Harold
time
Luff
off.
I'd worked there 7 years before I got there.
I mean, working for Mackenzie with no time off, working for the Department of Public Works with low wages and no time off, and I mean, like
I couldn't understand joining the guild.
Yeah, what
and
was
them
the
not going to bat for me?
Yeah, what was the guild supposed to do? It was not quite a union, was it? Was it? Or
It was in its infancy.
yeah, was it a kind of a hiring hall as well, or
I think that's just about what it was.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Because it's the guild manager had this other job for you for the CPR as a
Union
mate of the
steamship, yeah.
or Union steamship on the Cardinia,
Yeah.
and so basically must have happened up in the office was, did he come in to ask for time off, and then they said no, and so he figured you were going to quit, so he offered you the Union Steamship
Yeah,
job?
he came down to offer me that before I quit.
Yeah.
Because I never told him I was going to quit, but I guess he figured that I wasn't going to accept no time off.
Yeah. I mean, it boggles the mind that they can and then when you're working for Gulf of Georgia in the river, as you were saying, 24-hour shifts.
Well, I started working out there for relieving that guy on the Cupright, and it was right in the flood, the big flood.
Of 48.
Yeah, well, I was on they kept the Cupright. I started there in 47, November 47.
Mm-hmm. And then by the next spring,
And
yeah.
so I worked there during the flood.
How did the flood affect port operations? Like, did they have to?
Slowed down tremendously.
But they kept they were still loading ships, but or were they?
It slowed
'Cause-
down tremendously.
Uh-huh.
Put it that way. That normally they could have moved the barges alongside the ship themselves with their lines, but with the tide running so damn fast down there, they had to have a tug so they wouldn't lose the barge. If they tried to move the barge and it slipped off the stanchion or something, and they'd have a hell of a time trying to keep it in. So they wanted a tug there all the time. They were moving. So if you'd be at a ship and you'd be moving 3 or 4 barges around until they got them all where the supercargo wanted them. Then you took off, and
And the river must have
you
been
had
just
about 7 ships in,
Yeah.
all loading at the same time.
the river must have been right up to the top of the dock as well. Like
The
it might-
railway tracks were,
under.
well, yeah, they were between the tracks were wet.
I'd heard that there was, at the height of it, there was 18 inches of water at Columbia and 8th.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah.
I know the water was up to the tracks. When you're coming to work in the morning,
Huh.
you had to wade across the tracks. But then you look out in the river and you see little shacks coming down with chickens on top of the roof, and
Wow.
dead animals, bloated animals floating down. Well, it was awful, put it that way.
There must have been a lot of fear that it was going to get worse too.
People were up in Matsquey area. It was all covered with water. They were having a rough time up there.
They were frantically diking around Queensboro.
So after a couple of weeks up, few months up there, after the freshet was over in 48, I got sent in here to be skipper on the George A. Walkham little harbor tug in
Mm-hmm.
the harbor. I worked on harbor tugs for about 3 years, 2 or 3 years, and then I was put on the Trojan II, which was one of the 3 tugs that they bought. Macon Tug and Barge. I was on her for about 3 years,
Was that back in the river?
hauling barges from the river to the harbor and harbor to the river, feeding the Vancouver harbor. And then they built the Black Bear, their first steel tug. So we had 165 Vivian in
Mm-hmm.
the Trojan II, and we did all the work with that.
That's a reasonably powerful small tug for that time, isn't it?
She was a good tug. Well, she was about 60 foot,
Mm-hmm.
probably tug, drawing about 7 feet. She didn't have all the power in the world for what we were loaded up with.
Mm-hmm. When you're working for Gulf of Georgia in New Westminster, moving lumber scows, what were the wages for the captains at that time?
There would be somewhere around $1,500 a month, roughly.
Or a $1,500 a year, or
No,
oh,
$1,500
a month. So that was pretty decent money then. I mean, compared to
Well,
what you're
they
making.
should have paid more.
Considering you're working 24-hour
I think-
shifts.
Well, I guess the original crews up there they arranged that themselves because they had 3 crews on one tug.
Hmm.
And so you worked 1 week, well, 2 weeks on 24 on and off, and the 3rd week off. And so with the 3rd week off, they're looking forward to everybody looking for that 3rd week off. You work
Right.
2 weeks, 24 hours a day, every other day.
Gosh.
You know,
And your
you
day
were pretty
off.
bleary-eyed by the time you got home.
Yeah, your day off. You're getting home in the morning, I guess, and you got to sleep.
Well, in the harbor tugs here, you went to work at night at 6 o'clock and got off at 7 in the morning, a 13-hour night shift, 11-hour day shift.
Wow. That's pretty brutal. You're
I look back now and I think, you know, what an idiot I was. When I was young, I always had a bicycle. Why in the hell didn't I have a bicycle then? Because in the harbor tug, well, sometimes I would work the tides. They'd just work right with what I had. Because the boss would tell me over the telephone, I'd write down all the orders that I had to do during the night. And I'd figure which one I'd do first to work it between myself. If I got finished at 3 o'clock in the morning, I could go home.
right, but there's
A
no.
lot of the time I'd end up down the immigration building where we tied up down
Uh-huh.
at Butte Street, foot of Butte Street at the BA Oil. And I'd walk all the way home up to Capitol Hill, for heaven's sake. And I get stopped half a dozen times by the cops.
Like
In my
you're.
lunch bucket, you know,
a
walking up the
vagrant?
street at 3 in the morning.
What are you doing?
And they never gave me a ride home.
Oh.
No. But I thought, well, why didn't I have a bike? I could have put it on the trunk cabin
Yeah,
and I could come and go, whether I ended up in the creek or the harbor.
yeah.
You know, I could.
That would have been handy.
But anyway, you look
So-
back now,
yeah.
the hours were pretty. Nobody would work those hours today, I'm sure.
No, it seems just crazy. I mean, dangerous. You know, like by the time you're at hour 18,
Well,
you must be just about.
I always tell everybody from 3 o'clock to 7 in the morning was the worst hours,
Mhm.
the very worst hours. That's when you're at an ebb, a real ebb. You know.
Yeah.
If you're going to have any accidents, it was going to be then.
You're just waiting for the sun to come up, and then you kind of wake up a little bit more. Now the captain's working 24 hours on, 24 hours off. What were the deckhands working? Were they on the?
Same thing.
the
You were up all the time.
wow.
You're up all the time. There's always something going on.
Jeez. So on your
There's like
day,
a freight train dropping a barge off here, dropping barge off there, dropping barge off here, picking something up here, picking something up there, picking something up there. You're always doing something, always going. You never had a chance starting to get your head down.
wow. So you'd be pretty thrashed by the time you get home,
Oh yeah.
and and then you wake up and have to go back
I
to
get
work.
home around 9 in the morning and I go to bed. I wake up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. My daughter get home from school. That's the only time she see me.
Yeah.
So I crawled into bed that night to finish off my sleep and leave home 6:30 in the morning to go back out to Westminster.
So, both captains and deckhands for Gulf of Georgia out of New Westminster were working these 24-hour shifts. Do you recall what the deckhands were making? Were they on an hourly wage or were they a monthly
Not
wage
all
as well?
monthly wages. I don't know what they were doing.
Okay. How did you guys get something to eat when you were on board? I mean, these are small tugs. They didn't have much in the way of a galley, did they? Or did you just bring a bag lunch?
Oh no, we every morning at like at Westminster, we met over at the grocery store, loaded up for the 24 hours.
Oh, okay. Did the company?
My first impression of course, I was brought up during the Depression where you, by God, you ate every little scrap of food there was and put in front of you. When I joined Gulf of Georgia, it was quite a shock. I first went over there and met the other two crew members off the Cupright, and they loaded up cardboard boxes and, at the counter and checked out through. I guess there was a count at Gulf of Georgia, and they
Okay.
hauled it back down to the boat.
So the company fed you at least.
Oh yes, you got whatever you picked out. You
Huh.
went down for your 24 hours. Not all the crews got on together. I found it.
Excuse me. I'm just going to turn that off. Not all the.
Obviously, they never got on together,
Uh-huh.
because as soon as my crew got down to the boat, the first thing they opened the icebox door and started throwing bottles of milk out into the river, pounds of butter, whatever there was in there. Unloaded the icebox, unloaded it, and put the stuff that they just bought at Super Value, loaded up.
They wouldn't even
went
take
out
it
to
home?
On top of the trunk cabin was where the lettuce and tomatoes and,
Mm-hmm.
and vegetables were kept. When we go there and open up the box and start throwing all the green vegetables up and then dumping the box of Super Value, new Super Value stuff in there.
That must have seemed just bizarre. I mean,
And these are younger people than me. So when we got underway, I got to know their first names, and I mentioned to them that why didn't you just take that grub home instead of throwing it in the bloody river? Why didn't you take it home or do something with it? There's lots of starving people around, but I've never seen anything like that in my life at any company, ever throwing stuff overside, food overside, never. Oh, we always did that. We don't like those bastards on the other shift. And I said, well, that's the last time I'm going to watch you do that. You're not going to do that anymore.
Huh.
He said, what do we know what's left here? I said, don't worry about what's left. Just buy what you want to eat on your shift. Take it down on board. And I said, let them dispose of it or take it home, whatever they want to do with it, and what's left. But I don't want to see you throwing any food over the side. I said, this boat will be going aground on milk bottles, full milk bottles, every class milk bottles. I wouldn't sail with anybody that did that.
that's just crazy.
That was common
Wow.
then.
Just chucking food over.
Yeah.
Just to annoy the other guys, and since the
Yeah.
company's paying for it regardless. No, that's the company's buying all this extra food.
Well, the boss wasn't standing on the dock while they were doing
Well, I
it.
presume, yeah, yeah,
I'm sure they wouldn't have done it if the boss
Yeah.
was standing there.
yeah.
But anyway,
You described earlier some of the challenges of handling the lumber scows for ship loading. You don't have an assist tug or anything like that. You're
Oh,
doing it
no.
all yourself.
you would have been fired if you hadn't even asked for an assist tug.
Yeah, you're expected
Gulf of
to
Georgia.
manage all that.
Never, ever had an assist tug.
Hmm.
Don't ever remember, though I needed them in the worst way sometimes. But
Uh-huh. Right. How many? You'd have as many as 3 scows under your care at any one time, right? Like when you're
Well, if you had-
towing down from the.
well, as far as loads go, if the weather was right and there weren't any CPR boats going by, you could bring half a dozen in at the time if you wanted to.
CPR boats because of their wash,
Oh yeah,
because they're.
you break your lines. Oh, you snap your coupling lines.
Wow. Okay.
Empties. Weekends were cleanups between the river and the harbor, and I've gone out to 6 empties on the tow line many times.
And this is on 165 horse or thereabouts.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, if you're towing a boom of logs, you're not going that fast.
Yeah.
You're going perhaps 5 knots with 6 barges. You get them empty barges moving, they move.
Mhm.
Take them up as far as Marpole and push them alongside a boom, and then take them apart from there and deliver them where they're supposed
To
to
the various
go.
mills.
1 or 2 at a time. Yeah.
Then you got some work as a dispatcher. When they put you in
Well,
this
that's when they
relief,
brought me ashore. Yeah.
that sounded like a quite a challenge, because you were basically orchestrating all the tugboats and
Well,
barge movements.
Initially, my boss, staff, he dispatched. He was looking after the tugs, and his partner Ray Bicknell was looking after Falls Creek Industries and the shipyards. So staff was kind of dispatching everything by himself. And one of the guys on the harbor tugs, he tripped over himself down at the oil dock and cracked a vertebrae or something. And when workers' compensation put him back together again, well, they told him he wasn't to go back in the office. So staff changed things over and decided to bring Emil into the office. And Emil, he never had a ticket, but he was operating a harbor tug.
And so you're then out on the decks of the various freighters, talking to the supercargoes.
Oh yeah, well, I had to. I was on the phone to everybody then. When they brought me in, they put me opposite Emil, and so I'm not sure how we worked. One of us went in at 7 in the morning till about 6 at night, and the other went in at 6 at night till midnight. Then you took the phone home with you, and Tasco phoned you at home, so you're never off the phone until morning, until the other guy got in the office. So but we had over 300 barges and 14 tugs to look after, and we had to know where all of them were. We had a morning conference call, and an afternoon conference call, and an evening conference call. So you had to know where everything was up and down the coast.
Yeah. Did you find that your experience during the war, when you were in charge of naval transport, motor transport, that required a lot of organizational skills and a lot of practical, like handling
Well,
men?
the problem was there that you were the beginner. There wasn't anybody ahead of you.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't know where your authority started and where it stopped. You didn't know who to talk to. You didn't know who to take orders from. It was just growing. And then they got a $1 a year man,
Harold Husband. Yeah.
who owned Vancouver Island coach lines, like
Yeah.
Greyhound buses up and down all the way up to Campbell River, I guess. And he owned the Colonist paper and the Victoria Times. His office was in the Colonist, and he operated from there.
But that experience that you had working for and setting up that operation must have been really useful for you when you went into the office.
Well, the thing was that it was never in operation before. They had civil servants driving Navy trucks and cars, and they didn't have naval personnel. And so I had to start out and put naval personnel into everything. And I had to go and knock on Admiral Berdeur's front door and ask him if I could use his garage. It had never been used. 6-car garage with overhead doors. And he said, "Sure, why not? I ain't using the bloody thing. I ain't even got a car." He's French Canadian. He was a great guy. But he didn't stand on any ceremony. He was a down-to-earth guy. He really was. And if it hadn't been for him and the naval stores officer, he was a civilian, I couldn't have operated with them.
But still, you must have come out of that with really good experience that helped you later on, eh? Like,
Well, managing experience, if you put it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
I had a lot of managing experience out of that.
And did
Well,
you find that
I just had that going in Esquimalt when
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden they told me I was on the 23rd of September 1943. I was coming to Vancouver because they had more cars and trucks coming to Vancouver than they had ever had on the island, and I was to look after Rupert, Kamloops, Mission, Matsqui, and Vancouver, and North Vancouver. Wow.
Getting back on the boats after that must have seemed so easy.
It was.
And just
Because I took orders then.
yeah,
I knew what my perimeter was.
yeah. When did some other questions here. How did the maintenance of the dredge channels by the DPW affect you when you were working the tugs in the Fraser? Did it get better or worse over time? The time you were working
Well,
there?
all they did was Westminster Harbor, and above the bridge opposite the penitentiary. That's as far up as we went. Above Mohawk
Mhm.
Handle was about as far up as we went.
So the
Then we went down to Pitcatley that had a gravel operation on the north arm of the
Mhm.
Fraser, just below Marpole. And we dredged a whole pile of sand out of the river onto his property,
hmm
but we didn't dredge any more of the river. That was it.
So when you were working tugs, did that really influence? I mean, the tugs aren't drawing that much, and I guess the barges aren't drawing that much. What, 6 feet maybe?
Well, it could be a little more depending on the general 8-foot hulls.
Okay.
34 by 90s were standard. 36 by 100 were the next largest ones. And you get lumber, and their lumber's light, so
Mhm.
you're not down in the water that much. Even a fully loaded barge could be down about 6-7 feet in the water. On the tugs drawing 7 feet. Very often, when the river was low tide, and the river was half the time, be coming down with barges from, say, White Pine,
Mhm.
especially with the Trojan too, because we always were always out of White Pine, loading up out of White Pine or AP
Uh-huh.
at Westminster, Alaska Pine, coming around to Vancouver, and I'd lace up right tight, my bridles right tight to the winch, and so I would have maybe stern that far away from the barge,
Hmm.
from the lead barge, and have them all laced tight together, and come down there at low water, and be going like this. Tug would be pushed over by the barges, pushed over these humps of sand.
Wow.
But you know, in the bottom of the river, it never stops moving. It's
Yeah.
always moving out. If
Yeah.
you had a camera and could look down and see those bottom of the river, it's just like ocean waves all the time. The bottom of the river.
The sand is being
Every
kind
time.
of pushed
it's
down.
going steady out. Going steady out. And so there's these rivulets of sand across the river. And you see any tugs with drawing more than 7 feet of water, they're tied up to a log boom waiting for the tide to come
Hmm.
up. Because when I was in the summertime, Gilly Brothers used to want me to take the Gryphon and go opposite the Gilfoam with our friend. And tow opposite him. And she was drawing about 9 feet of water. And I'd have to come up the slough behind Mitchell Island. I'd get up just below the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to hang on there until the tide caught up to me before I could go up through the Fraser
Okay.
Street Bridge there,
Yeah.
the little one there between Mitchell Island and Vancouver. I have to wait there until the tide came up because there wasn't enough water to
Right.
go all the rest of the way up, and so that could put me late getting to Westminster in the morning. with the empties.
But the Department of Public Works didn't see that as their mandate then to
Well, obviously they didn't, because they had the fruling in the main river
Yeah.
doing the bottom, sucking
uh-huh.
up sand and then dumping it out off the lightship.
Like what the Fraser Titan does now.
Yeah. But the Fraser Titan salvages that and sells it.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's what pays for the Titan,
yeah.
is the sale of the sand.
Did navigational aids and channel depth stay pretty much the same, and how satisfactory was it? Like the aids to navigation.
Well, we didn't have any aids to navigation in the.
There's a couple of
in the
range
North
lights
Arm.
and markers, weren't there? Oh, that's in the main channel, I guess. Yeah.
No, on the North Arm, we just had the odd light, the
Uh-huh.
inner light, the second light, and the outer light on the pilings.
Uh,
But all that rock put down there in the North Arm, I hauled that stuff from Indian River.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
The North Arm jetty that comes
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. When I was working for Mackenzie's, J.K. Mackenzie, two barges a day out there to
Wow.
the coast quarries, quarried at Granite Falls across from the lodge up there. That used to be the quarry, rock quarry,
Uh huh.
like the same as Gillies had
Yeah.
in the pit.
There in the pit.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you were dispatching, did any of the river tugs at that time have radio, or did you have to contact them?
Oh, they all had
Directly.
FM radio.
Oh,
We
so you could call.
We never had. We had our first radar in 1958 on the Gabriel. We had the pilot from Marconi. Pilot set from Marconi. And matter of fact, Jim Byrne hired the Marconi specialist to look after all our
That was your first radar.
radars on the tugs. So I only had a year of radar before I came ashore.
In the late 50s, I think it was, there began to be a movement to assert, better working conditions among marine workers on the coast. Did that affect your situation? When the guild got a little bit stronger, and there was, I believe there was a bunch of strikes, like the merchant seamen, like for the when they had the Canadian government merchant marine and all that, right after the war, they'd gone on strike and stuff like that.
That was before my time.
Okay.
That's before I went on the boats, work on the boats. One of our skippers refused to strike. He was a skipper on the Goblin.
Oh yeah.
He refused to strike. His name was Jack Lowry, and he was an old-time skipper with Gulf of Georgia. He had two sons, Jack and Norm, and they both became skippers at Gulf of Georgia. And they were the two skippers that with Harry Huntley from Richmond Transfer, they bought Bridge Towing.
Oh yeah.
They're the ones that I used to go and relieve
Huh.
in my week off.
Okay. So like labor issues when you like in the run up to the time when you went into the office, that that really wasn't happening then. It was everything was just sort of
No, I
business
went
as
to,
usual.
I joined the guild when I went to work at Mackenzie Barge.
Uh-huh.
I joined the guild then.
And was that because you just were hoping that would give you a little bit?
You know what it
backup,
was
or?
when I was working before I got out of the Navy for that week. I was working for Union Towing down from Knights Inlet.
Mm-hmm.
The Union Jack came alongside me up the coast. I can't remember where, but the skipper on there I'd known before the war on the boats, and I for a short period of time I went to work on I think it was after I left, I think it must have been after I left Mackenzie's for
Mhm.
a couple of weeks. I went to work for Union Towing again on the Green Point, and Bob was skipper on the. I forget what name of the tug it was, and we both ended up at Bowen Island waiting for a westerly to go down so we'd go across the. One could go across the river, one could go to Vancouver Harbor, and we were over at Coppermine Bluff, just near Snug Cove, and he got word on the radio that he was wanted at the Guild. He'd applied for a job as agent for the Canadian Merchant Service Guild, and he said, can we switch toes? You take the one to the river, and I'll take the one to the harbor because I'm quitting as soon as I get in the Guild. And so he found out that I'd gone to Gulf of Georgia towing, so pretty well the second day I was down there, who should knock on my wheelhouse door but Bob, signing me up. That's one of the first ones he signed up to the Guild. Bob Fulton.
Did ice affect you working in the New Westminster waterfront some winters?
Yes, well, it did because everything was wood in those days.
Mhm.
It was before we got our steel tug in '52, and we had to protect everything, barges and tug. We had a couple of steel plates at the bow of the tug over top of the gumwood, so we could break driftwood or anything from hitting the
Mhm.
wood. That's all the protection we had outside of the gumwood. On the barge, there was no protection on the barges. There was just the oakum there.
Mm-hmm. And the ice would really abrade the
And it
timber,
cut.
right?
The ice would just
Cut into
the
it.
knife over and chop that stuff to pieces.
It's amazing when you think
So
about
we
it.
had to get a couple of boomsticks and hang them on a tagline from the stern to protect the
Like a big V in
flow of
front.
ice and the barge in beside. And that meant a lot of extra maneuvering when we got into a ship. To
Because you got to
to
take
get the
these-
logs out from in front of the barge, and
Right.
the barge tied up where it should be, and we'd hang the logs on another barge until we got these ones all tied up where they're supposed to, and then
It's got to be cold and kind of dangerous work for the deckhands, eh?
slippery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they use cork boots or
Oh no.
no?
Not a lot of cork boots in the boat. No. Those that worked around mills, they put conveyor belting on the deck of the tugs.
Yeah. So they could wear
so
corks
they
on the
could
deck.
Jump on and off. Yeah.
You described earlier a really rapid transition from the use of lumber scows and shiploading work, and you linked it with the expansion of trucking. Could you describe the changes that the trucking industry proposed and how this affected the mill workers and the managers and then your industry?
Well, Gulf of Georgia, I was in charge of the sales and the business. We had two contracts for hauling lumber. One was McMillan Bloedel and one was Seaboard Shipping Company, who both had their shipping companies. Seaboard, we had 28 mills signed up on the Seaboard mills for exporting. McMillan had their own
Mhm.
customers.
Was this about 1960 or so, or
60, yeah.
yeah? And it was around that time that the
Yeah,
truckers.
So we had a contract. I got a contract with Seaboard for 5-year contract to barge the lumber from the mills around to the dock that they built over in terminals
Hmm.
for North Vancouver. After 3 years, it expired. East Indian Trucking Company approached them and offered them 24-hour, 7-day service in trucking lumber from the mills to Seaboard. That would relieve the mills of inventory in their yards. As soon as the lumber was cut for shipment and packaged, on a truck and over to Seaboard's main loading dock. And
Do
so
you-
that in turn,
Do you remember the name of the trucking company?
I don't, but they trucked from all the mills, Hebron included, Hebron Sawmills included. Hebron had their own barges too.
And that changed the whole game.
Everything changed. The ships at Westminster, they no longer were all lumber at Westminster. It changed everything.
Well, that's the most incredible thing. So it's really one company that initiated this
Yes.
huge shift in
So after three years, they canceled our 5-year contract. Said, so sorry, please, but we're going trucking.
and you had
So
all,
here we were left with a brand new fleet of steel lumber barges. Had been getting rid of all their old wooden barges as fast as we could. And using the steel barge that was larger would load twice as much lumber on one barge as we could on a wooden barge. And
were they cheaper to build too? The steel barges at that
well,
point.
they built it like they built maybe a dozen at a time.
Yeah.
They never built them in China in those days.
Yeah.
They built them all here in the different shipyards here. But they could turn them out very, very fast.
Because
Flat bottom,
a
flat
wooden
deck.
barge, yeah, that's
And
got a
steel, they just turn around fast. They get the steel in, welders, away they go. They bring around to the Falls Creek, to a dock, and put the boys to work in there with putting 2x6 on edge on the deck and laminating the deck for cargo, for gravel or lumber, whatever. You had to have them that thick because you had 988 cats, front end loaders, running up and down there with gravel, which are very, very heavy. The
right.
pound per square inch on the deck is severe. And but we had these all in lumber, and of course when that happened, that was very, very severe to us with our equipment. Now what do we do with our lumber barges? So the only thing to do with lumber barges, they look very much like ship barges with low boxes on. And so our company decided to hell, the manager of our company, he decided, well, he was an MBA, and he decided with his,
That was Ray Bignell?
no, it was Dave Smarter.
Oh.
He used to be in the CNR in Montreal. And he was in the machinery business. He was also selling and repairing the cats. Vancouver Ironworks was one of his companies. And he did a job for somebody, and it required a barge. The guy Beverly supplied a barge, and I guess he had a Caterpillar or some piece of logging equipment, and took it and had it delivered and brought it back. And the fellow said, well, what do you want? He said, Walken said, what do you want me to do with the scow? He said, it's yours. I don't want it. I don't need it. He was in a machine shop. He didn't know what to do with it. So all of a sudden he thought, well, it's just done a job. Maybe I can make some use of it. So he started renting it out for $5 a day. You know? And he got so that he got another barge, and he ended up, when I got there, they had 300 of them. You know, various sizes and ship barges and everything else.
Yeah.
And that's how the accumulation went.
Well, you look at the way they're built. You know, the multiple keelsons. You know, 8x14s, 8x16s. You know, this huge amount of timber. And even though it's pretty cheap, I was just wondering, like when steel barges came in, the simplicity of their construction compared to having
just a box, and they're just tin boxes welded together. That's all the barges.
And you don't need a gang of corkers, you know, underneath cork and seam. Yeah. And so it must have made a no problem. We were talking about that shift to packaged lumber and the immense change that the trucking industry put in. And I mean, that really changed the whole game for Gulf of Georgia. Now, with chip barges, the wood chips. I mean, this isn't just sawdust. This is deliberately chipped wood for the pulp mill industry. Yeah, yeah. But
These
were
are
you
logs
also?
that all the bark is taken off,
Yeah.
and that's put what they call hog fuel. They go into a furnace
Yeah.
at the mill for steam, manufacturing steam at the pulp mill.
Were prices, like in terms of contract pricing for moving chips and hog fuel, was that the same? Like, I mean, it's the costs are the same for you, aren't they?
Or $1, and hog fuel is a cent.
Yeah,
Kind of that kind of thing.
yeah.
And Harold A. Jones, the guy that hired me, was the one that started he was the one that started hog fuel.
Oh, yeah.
Hog fuel they used to put it in beehive burners.
Yeah, yeah.
And he changed that. He took it out of beehive burners, put it on his barges, and took it to pulp mills, and they burnt it for fuel.
Right.
Instead of cutting out logs and burning for fuel in the pulp mill, he hauled hog fuel barges.
That's a pretty
And
amazing.
that's how he started one of his biggest industry was hauling hog fuel, which is garbage.
Yeah,
You see, the hog fuel is just a little bit above the box because it's all full of knots and bark.
it's
and
way
the
denser, eh? Yeah,
chips, you've got to weigh up.
Yeah.
The peak is so light. Just
yeah.
complete wood chips all ready to go into the digester.
It's so ironic that
The
I've talked to such.
we were gonna
Carry on from was before, make use of the chip barges.
Mhm.
Dave Smurler decided, well, I'm going to compete with our competitors in the chip business because we didn't have any chip contracts. So he talked my boss into putting a few bucks together and putting some chip barges on our lumber barge haul,
mhm.
which he did. And because our competitors have been going along for 30 or 40 years without anybody bidding against them,
The storm surge and the high.
he went to these companies and said, I'd like your chip contract. I says, well, we're doing with Vancouver Tug, well, how about putting it out for bid? And so the companies put it out for bid, the chips out for bid, not thinking for a minute that Gulf of Georgia would be a successful one. Gulf of Georgia one.
And this is just because you already had
Macmillan
them.
Bedell lumber.
Uh-huh.
We got all Macmillan Bedell chips for Harmac and for Call River, all of it. And besides that, we went to Cromzella back, and they never had anybody bid against them, that for Vancouver Tug. So we bid against Vancouver Tug for Cromzella back at Campbell River. We got it. Here we're hauling trainloads of ships up the coast to Powell River and across to Campbell River and back down. We had all. That's what caused Genstar to buy Gulf of Georgia.
Because you were suddenly one of the biggest.
That was their lifeblood. And had been for years and years and years. Their lifeblood.
So Genstar needed you guys, or you were going to put them out of business.
We got their business.
Yeah.
So with our lumber barges, we got the chip barge.
Uh-huh.
With the chip contract. And Genstar bought us up.
Because it was they really had no choice then, did they? I mean, if they didn't, you were going to put them under.
Well, that was their bread and butter.
Yeah.
They were born on that, like Harold A. Jones, the guy that hired me. You know, I didn't know who he was. I was just a young kid.
Uh-huh.
But, Lindsay, the guy that came out and picked me up for the Kingsway, and was having coffee with my dad. Well, he was a wonderful guy, and what I didn't know on the Kingsway was that his son number 2, or 3 sons, son number 2, Rod Lindsay, came on board the Kingsway in the summertime with the captain's son. They were both going to university at the time, and they were both my age. And so, of course, we became very pal. We were all the same age.
Yeah.
And for a long time, all summer long on the Kingsway together. And his dad had brought me on board the Kingsway, Bob's dad. And the night went off because I got a bone broken in my wrist. Fraser Mills, as a matter of fact, with a chip barge.
How'd that happen?
Well, one of the bridle lines snapped back. We were shortening up deep sea gear alongside the dock, taking our deep sea gear off, and the bridle three-quarter inch wire snapped back and hit me in the wrist here. And my wrist was sore and swole up, and I didn't know what was wrong with it. But anyway, I kept on working as best I could. And we finished the tow over to Ladysmith, and then we had to pick up 3 empty barges from Kitsilano and Boyd to take up to Dundas Islands off Prince Rupert, load clamshells to go down to Tacoma for the poultry business.
Nobody
And
cares.
then we got back to Vancouver, and my hand was really swollen bad, so the skipper told me I should go off in compensation. Go to St. Paul's Hospital, get his wrist looked at. It was swollen. And they took some bone chips out of it.
Oh, yeah.
I was on compensation for about 6 weeks, and all ready to go back to work, and then I found out that in those days, once you go on compensation, you don't go back to work anymore. Because the company have paid you to be off on compensation.
Oh.
So while you've gone, you've hired somebody in your place, they're not going to lay him off. They can keep him going. You can find yourself another job. So
Wow. So that's how come he had to go to CPR then? Oh. That's rough.
but Rod Lindsay went to work for Vancouver Tug when he graduated. He went to work for Vancouver Tug, and he was always my friend. Always my friend. And because I knew his dad, and I was in the Vancouver Board of Trade for 15 years with his dad, the guy that hauled me with my stuff out to the Kingsway. He was the Vancouver Board of Trade with me
Huh.
for 15 years. We sat side by side. You know, I was like his son. You know?
Wow. That's really neat.
And then when Rod went to C-SPAN, when Rod went into C-SPAN,
Uh-huh.
of course, he never let our friendship diminish at all. We were always friends, even though I was his competition. Gulf of Georgia, I was his competition. He never let that interfere with our friendship. And
Yeah, because I mean, you're competitors, but you have a lot in
We
common.
got bought out and went there. Well, I guess he was my only friend at C-SPAN. Because all the rest were my competition. And the younger guys that were salesmen, one thing and another at the company, of course, they took offense to the fact that their vice president of C-SPAN was my buddy.
Hmm.
But he died of a heart attack about 2 or 3 months after he bought Gulf of Georgia. That was in '77.
Oh, that's wretched. I wanted to get to that later too about the kind of hard feelings and the difficulties in merging the two companies.
Well, I guess there always is. You know, when I
Yeah.
look at it now, if you're the company that's taking over somebody, you got the top job.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever you took over is not going to get your job. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That was the same way there.
Yeah. Even though there might be some really well-skilled and effective people in a lot of positions, they're not going to start
I
to.
had been in charge of Flufto Limity in Montreal for
Mhm.
my boss. I was part of his operation down there, and when
Yeah,
they got bought out by Genstar, well, I had to turn over
Yeah.
Flufto Limity to Montreal Towing, which was owned by Genstar. And I had to stay there for a month with Don McAllister, turning the company, our 10-year-old company, over to Don McAllister for C-SPAN.
So you were living in Montreal for about 10 years then, eh? Or,
Well, I'd be down there like in the summertime, every 2 weeks I'd spend in Montreal and 2 weeks here.
Oh, so you still
I had
lived
these-
here,
I had
really?
this coast to do too.
Okay. Wow.
And in the wintertime, of course, everything's frozen back there, so you don't
Mhm.
have anything, because everything's frozen up in the wintertime.
I wanted to get back to when you first moved into the office with Gulf of Georgia. How was billing done for shiploading work?
Well, the fellow that was ahead of me at Gulf of Georgia, Curly Beaumont, he was brought ashore not to dispatch, but to do invoice work, because had my job on the Gabriel before I went there. And so he went in the office because he knew the practical end of it, doing it himself.
Mm-hmm.
So he was had better knowledge than anybody else of the movement of tugs and barges and how long it took from A to B and what you had to, and the yarding you had to do. He knew all that. He knew how to bill it because he'd done it himself.
So you'd have an hourly, like per unit, like for
Well,
you
he would know exactly
so many
how long
hours
it took from A to B.
tug, so many hours
He'd
barge.
copy your logbook too, so
Mhm.
he knew exactly what it was, and from the dispatch sheets, what happened, and how long it took from A to B. So he was well prepared
Mhm.
initially to do that job. We just had a girl doing it before, and she didn't know, Alaska Blind from Silver Tree. It was just a name to her. They were different bills. She didn't know how far apart they were.
Mm. So you
So it worked extremely well with him. When I got there, well, Curly was already there, and then I went dispatching. I kind of I had the knowledge that Curly had when he went in the office too, and so it was much easier for me to dispatch.
when you're getting contracts and putting bids in for
I had
contracts.
to do it.
Yeah.
I did it all.
And so
Every bit of it.
how did you base your costing on that?
Oh, so much per day or per hour for the tug, and fundamentally the distance you had to work out your days that it would take to go and try to indicate how much speed you'd make over the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
Say from Texas to dial into Seattle with 2 big loads of limestone.
Mm-hmm.
How fast are you going with 765 horsepower? How fast are you going to go?
So that's
Have you any idea?
no.
I had to bid on that. And I got it. I beat Vancouver Tug. I got that. It's one of our biggest contracts.
That's really interesting. How much say did you have in which vessels you'd get to use? Like, because you've got to put together
know
the
that
bid.
I'd have to have at least 765 in order
Mhm.
to move them at 4 or 5 knots. That's all you get out of them.
So you got to, yeah. So you've got to meet with the other management to make sure that you've got these vessels free, like that.
I just dispatch. I'm going to need a 765 on such a day. We've got to take a couple of empties up to
Mhm.
up to Texada to load, and down to Seattle. I'll need them for 5 days. Need the tug for about 5 days.
And so then it's the dispatcher's job to make sure that they've got,
that I got a 765.
yeah, because you've put that bid in already, and
I've been
once you get
dispatching,
it,
and I knew that somebody would hammering me for, my boss would be coming and hammering me. I need a tug of 1,500 horsepower for a week here or something like that
Mhm.
there.
because that's how negotiable was pricing? Like, did you have the authority to bid at a loss for some jobs in order to get more work?
No,
You've got to bid for profit, for margin, right?
because I always heard about the guy going along the street and reaching down and picking up cigarette butts and saying, I was always low bid.
So, how did you solicit business? Like just cold calling?
Cold call, always cold call. Try to do 10 cold calls a day.
Hmm. And
Maybe you get 10%. I never expected more than 10%.
yeah. But if you can get one contract or one job a day, that's pretty good.
It's as much as I could. I'd go for 10, but I generally end up with 10%.
Mhm.
I've never bid on anything I couldn't do myself. That was my basis in sales.
How do you mean? Like,
Well, if I go in to sell some service to somebody,
mhm.
it'd be something I could do myself.
Okay,
I'd already done myself. I knew all the incidentals of it.
right.
I canvassed their property, I knew exactly what their property was, how, the distances and depths and all the rest of it.
Right on. So you personally know the logistics of getting
I tell
the
you, you have to
barge
do that.
and-
You have to know
yeah.
the background of these companies. Sometimes it comes as a complete surprise to you. You never know. I think I was probably looking in the book, there were Hooker Chemicals.
Yeah.
I never went there and asked him for a job. I went there for a cup of coffee at Tacoma at 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning or something. We got to be very, very good friends, Pete Roberts and I. He was
Uh-huh.
the,
From Hooker,
in
people
Tacoma.
in Tacoma. So,
Because I was delivering limestone to a putty plant down there for Domtar Chemicals in
Mhm.
Texas Island into Tacoma. And I'd have to go by the great big Hooker plant.
yeah. So you started thinking,
Hooker chemical plant. I thought, well,
we should be pulling in here.
I knew that Island Tug did all their
Mhm.
Hooker work, but I thought, well, you know, they got a nice looking building, beautiful lawns and that. Maybe I can talk to somebody in there. You know. And I knew that they hired Island Tug for a lot of the work. It didn't bother me. So I just went and met Chet Roberts, and that was it.
Hmm.
He just wanted to BS. Somebody sit down and we BS over a cup of coffee, and okay, I'll see you next week. Away we go.
But then gradually, you're in position.
Okay, after
yeah.
years of doing that calling, and one day, we're down in Gulf of Georgia, and I get called to the front desk. And, what the hell were you doing here, Chet? Oh, I came to see your bosses. Will you introduce me to your bosses? And I said, yeah, okay. And so it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so I went knocked on the door, and staff and Ray were both in. And I said, gentlemen, one of my friends in one of my calls in the States from Tacoma would like to talk to you, could I introduce you? And he came in. They said, oh yeah, bring him in. So Chet Roberts, there's Ray Becknell, and there's Staff Bird. Fine, I'll lead you guys to it. I walked up, and that was it. And that was, I guess, the best contract I ever got those guys.
Hmm. And then you
We
came,
got all their work.
yeah.
We got all their work. And the Gulf of Georgia even built a railway barge.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's because I used to be in the Tyson barge and CPR. That's why.
You had some experience there
I
too.
was in charge of that.
Yeah. And then you developed a tie down
The tongs,
system.
yeah, the tongs to hold the cars down on it. Yeah.
I had a couple more questions about back when trucking, basically blew the bottom out of lumber scows, and did they come forward at a time? This is about 1960, you said, right? When
It
the
would be just. It would be around 1970 roughly, and that happened because we were in Guinness Tower. We got CPR kicked us out of Falls Creek and everybody else out of Falls Creek, and we had to find an office, so we got the 18th floor of Guinness Tower. Jimmy, what's his name, was on the 19th floor. Jim Patterson. Next floor up. And we were in there until we got Orwell Street
Oh,
property.
yeah.
We rented off the Indians,
Oh.
Chief George and his boys. Orville Street, North Vancouver. We put a little office in there and a ramp.
The because I was wondering, like, do you think that there was issues going on with tugboats, that your crewing costs were going up and your and were your like
They went on strike. There was a big strike on. The tugboats went on strike, and the CPR ships went on strike, and everything went on strike at the time. It was really tough. It was tough going because a lot of the guys in the office had to go out on the tugs. I had to for just a couple of small jobs, but these guys had been guild members
yeah
until they went ashore.
yeah
When we first went ashore, we went ashore as associate memberships, $5 a year. And then the superintendent of our company was in charge of New Westminster, Jerry Williams. He was in charge. He was an officer in Pacific Coast Terminals, Captain Williams. And it was extremely busy in those days in the river.
that's Gulf of Georgia.
We needed a dispatcher in the river. So he was our manager dispatcher in the river. We took our orders from him.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just lost my...
Oh well, then the strikes happened, and then
yes, the strikes happened.
and then the trucking
We had-
industry
we had
moves
to-
in.
We had to go and fill in little bits and pieces. We had a big contract with CNR because we took over their 109 and 107, and we did all their railway towing to Cow Bay and Victoria. We did all that because they went out of business. They jumped to Kenora and sold rented those 107, 109 to Gulf of Georgia. We did their rail barge towing. That was a separate,
Mm-hmm.
another separate thing.
So in other
The
words,
CNR, we were in them very, very deeply. And Prince Rupert to Whittier, Alaska was in
mm-hmm.
them. And Dave Smyrna, he came from the CN.
the CN kind of scrapped all their marine operations
They
essentially.
scrapped all that, and Gulf of Georgia took them.
Yeah, and they had for a long time. Well, as Grand Trunk, they had a steamship line as well too, didn't they?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And
In the early days, they were very busy. And they had a good passenger service out of Vancouver, north of CN.
yeah,
There were CPR, Union steamships, which were CPR too. People don't know that, but Union steamship was CPR.
it was a subsidiary. Oh wow,
Yeah,
I didn't know.
it wasn't known around here, but it was. It was part of a lot of the mates went there as skippers.
Huh.
Too long to wait for a skipper's job in CPR, and so they went over to Union Steamship and did a few skipper's jobs there. And CNR. There's three big companies offering freight and passenger service, basically.
It must have been exciting times to be working on the water.
Yes, it was.
The let's see what we got here. Well, we've covered the basic.
Yeah, but also, the CN put a ramp on Richmond side, on number 7 road, just above White Pine, and they had a ramp, a railway ramp over where they just east of the there was the plywood plant at the foot of Boundary Road.
Mm-hmm.
They had a ramp in there, and we built a barge to transfer rail cars from the Vancouver side across the river, number 7 road. And
So you had almost a ferry service.
there
for
was
it.
a ferry service, transporting rails from CN over to Lode, because it evaded the switching costs on the CPR on this side.
Ah,
And that operated for a long time. Now, during the strike, and that's one of the jobs I got called into, to go down and use our Royal 3 and move the barge from the Vancouver side to the other side, or the other side to this side. And I had to cross through the picket line in order to do it.
that must have been kind of
These
uncomfortable.
guys,
eh?
I'd cross through the picket line. Now, I knew all these guys. I'd worked with them. you
Yeah.
know. And they say something to me, and I said, "You go to hell." I said, "Who's getting these jobs for you guys to do when you get back to work?" It's me.
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep us alive with CNR, to keep, this is part of the CNR contract, is keeping these alive.
They seem to.
And I said, somebody would be doing it, not the Gulf of Georgia tug, if I didn't do it.
Yeah.
One of the other river tugs would be doing it.
Yeah.
And so, and I, in the mail, I got a card, Scab of the Month award. In the mail. But after the break was over, we fell back to normal again, and of course, when I went to work for Harbor Ferry, so the last 4 years I was there, I was a guild operator, representative.
Oh, yeah.
I did all the negotiating for the guild
Huh.
the last 4 years I was there. It's all in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm really interested because we've got a lot of stuff that isn't in the book,
Yeah.
and I think that's really important to record.
Yeah, these little incidental. CNR was a big contract, and that was,
Mhm.
I was going to mention, that was one of them that I got involved in.
Yeah, you see in the early pictures on the river, you know, from up to about certainly from prior to the 40s, you always see the old Kenora in the river, and the Q quad, well, back when she was CN number 1, I guess, and you know, working their barges above New Westminster and that, and so it must have, yeah, they had a lot of work in those days, I guess. Why do you think they got out of their marine operations?
Well, they moved the rail down to Tilbury Island, and that became the new operations depot down in Tilbury Island, Ladner. And Lucille Johnson from Straits,
Mm-hmm.
a very good pal of mine for many, many years. And
But she was an amazing woman.
she wanted me to go to work for her and manage Tilbury Terminals. And I said, well, I've only got 6 years left with Gulf of Georgia. And I said, it would screw up a little pension I've got there. I wouldn't gain
Yeah.
that much. I've been with Gulf for 30 years or so.
Yeah.
And I said, it's just not right. I know that you are in pals for so many years, but no, I don't think so. She was Lucille McDonald for so many years before she married this American, this Johnson guy. But, she married 3 times. I forget what the first marriage was. It fell apart, and then McDonald fell apart. She never did have any kids of her own. She had a bunch of Indian children
Mm-hmm.
that she looked after and put through school, and
Wow.
she was very, very good with kids.
I only met her the one time in a meeting setting up the Fraser River Discovery Center, and what a phenomenal person. I mean,
Yeah,
she
she's-
just so much strength and
She's-
intelligent, just sharp.
Well, when I was on the Cuba, she was a 16-year-old girl, and her office was behind Mercer's shipyard, and she would be dispatching out of there at 3 in the morning, and she'd hear us on the tug, and I guess it'd be lonesome dispatching there by herself, and
Yeah.
she'd get on the radio and she'd BS with us on the radio. So that's when we first got acquainted
Mm-hmm.
that way, and then when I finally got in the office, well, then we were more acquainted in the office. She'd grown up, she was over 21 then, and more materialistic, and I guess she got married by then too.
Yeah.
But she used to go to all the guild dances and things that we used to have. Yeah.
Let's see what else I've got here. There's oh yeah, getting back to the merger with C-SPAN. I mean, now, you know, you see there's still some Gulf of Georgia tugs now, and I think like the Gulf Irene is and Gulf Julia and Sally, I think, are all in the C-SPAN fleet.
Yes.
I keep seeing them around, but I don't know which one's which, because they're still at work.
I
And
had 4 of them built over
yeah,
at Surrey.
at Vito's.
Vito George,
C-SPAN Defender was Gulf Julia. And you still see her around in the river. She's working chippers and that.
The Mission Bridge collapse and all that stuff.
You mentioned it. We didn't get that
52?
very much on tape last time. There was a...
That was a big operation.
What happened to it was a
It was undermined by the freshet.
right.
The South Pier, it collapsed and took 2 trusses with it. And that meant the railway was interrupted for 2 years.
2 years.
Traffic was interrupted for 2 years.
Wow. That was in 52, you said?
Yes.
And you guys were working there with scows for quite a while, bringing in...
for 2 years. Worked across to Matsqui.
Mhm.
They put a ramp at Matsqui and one at Mission. Worked for the Department of Highways.
Oh, yeah.
Phil Gallardi.
And you also had a lot of work in the building of the original Port Mann Bridge, too, didn't you?
Yeah, Portman Bridge for the pillars holding the cement buckets out from shore.
Mhm. Do you remember who the contractor was for all the pile driving for that?
Can't say who it was in those days.
They drove a ton of piles.
They built the cofferdams and
Yeah.
fill them up with cement.
The other thing we were talking about last time too was just the lack of depth of water above the Port Mann Bridge, and why they built this thing with 150 foot of clearance when there's really
Well, I think that in the Portman Bridge, I think they were anticipating maybe shipping going higher than Fraser Mills or the mortar plant.
Mhm.
I'm not too sure. That's as far up as navigation was in
Mhm.
those days.
The funny thing though is that the new one that they built spent $4 billion on it, the same height.
I cannot understand.
Yeah,
The dredge has never been up that far.
yeah, nothing.
And look at the height of the bridge at Mission.
Yeah,
Gracious. I used to go around with the Gabriola.
yeah. And the one they built in there's not quite the same height, but still
One
the
up there, Legacy,
Golden Ear one is one.
Legacy Bridge.
Yeah.
There's some 5 feet of water and there's the most.
Mm-hmm.
And the Rosedale Legacy ferry used to go across, drawing 5 feet of water.
Yeah. Well, Ed, I want to thank you for this. I'm going to wrap it up, I think, for today because I've